Welcome to day 4. As you can see, it's another fine day, although if the BBC weather app is to be believed, I might pick up a bit of rain on my route around about 2 or 3 o'clock this afternoon. Got my jacket on this morning, not because of the rain that's forecast later today. It's got the nip in the air. It's quite chilly. Probably the sun's not up very high yet. I'm sure it will warm up later on during the day. Anyway, we stayed in Halesworth last night, and I have to say it's the most delightful little historic market town. Unfortunately, I have to admit to never having been there before, but I will try and make amends by visiting it again and spending more time there in the near future. I also have to admit that when I started out from Norwich yesterday, which already seems quite a long time ago, I was actually really quite apprehensive. I'll explain why. It's not unusual when I cycle for a day that I get some form of aches and pains in my knees, pins and needles in my hands, sharp pains in my feet, and not to mention, dare I say, the numbness in the gonads. All of these can and often will be experienced, and I was expecting all or any of these to happen at some stage during this trip. However, out on day 2, that's not what bothered me. About 95 kilometres into the ride, with, put it the other way around, another 25k to go, I had excruciating cramps in my left thigh, and then I had to stop, work it off, carried on. 5 minutes later, I had exactly the same in my right thigh. Same thing again. Carried on. 10 minutes later, both of my legs pretty much seized up, and I had to stop altogether and just simply get off the bike, massage my legs, stretch my muscles, obviously taking more fluid, and I actually just lay down for 20 minutes, relaxing my legs, stretching as much as I could, and then got back on the bike and managed to get into Reepham, where I stopped, walked around and just tried to relax the legs, and that seemed to have done the trick, and I made it eventually to Norwich. So I wasn't expecting that. I've never actually had that before cycling. I think a lot of it could have been to do with the heat that day and the previous day. Anyway, after a lot of hydration and stretching during the evening and the next morning, touch wood, but there's no wood really for me to touch here at the moment. everything seemed to be fine yesterday, and I've learnt my lesson. I'm stretching those muscles like anything every time I stop, because I don't want to repeat that. I have to tell you, it was very painful and in a sense a bit frightening. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere thinking, oh my god, can I continue? Anyway, that's I know we're on day 4, but that's a story of day 2, which I just wanted to recount to you. Anyway, we're heading down towards Sutton Hoo, which many of you, I'm sure, will have heard about, the site of the famous discovery of an Anglo-Saxon burial ship. I don't know how much time I'll have to look around there, but certainly I want to make that one of the stopping points on this trip. I'm standing outside St Andrew's Church in the Suffolk village of Marlesford. I stopped here because I want to see, if possible, the memorial, which I believe to be in the church, of Flora Yoldinich Nee Sanders. Most of you, I suspect, will not have heard of Flora, which is a great shame, because she was an amazing woman, indeed the only British female to have served during the First World War. She was born in Nether Poppington in Yorkshire in 1876, but her father was the rector here at St Andrews, and as a result of that, at the age of 9, she moved down from Yorkshire with her family to live here in the village. In fact, the rectory is behind those trees over there. We might go and have a quick look at it later on, because I assume that's where Flora lived as a young girl. At the outbreak of World War I in 1914, Flora tried to enlist as a nurse, but was rejected out of hand due to her lack of qualifications. Undeterred, she joined a group of 35 other women in a St Ambulance unit that was sent out to provide humanitarian aid and support to the wounded and the war effort in Serbia, and she left for Serbia in 1914. Since Serbia, she later joined the ambulance of the 2nd Regiment at the Babuna Pass, and there was actually later enlisted as a private in the Serbian army by General Milos Vaslik, and she rose to the rank of corporal and eventually became a sergeant major. Whilst in service at Bitola in 1916, she was wounded by a grenade, and as a result of this and her action there, she was subsequently awarded the Order of the Karađorđe Star, the highest decoration of the Serbian military. She was eventually demobilized from the Serbian army in 1922 and eventually returned to England. In her later life, she lived not far from here in the village of Lower Hatcherston and died in 1956 in one of the hospitals in Ipswich, and indeed she was then cremated. She's not buried here in the churchyard. She was cremated in Ipswich and her ashes apparently were scattered in the Garden of Remembrance in Ipswich. But inside this church, I believe there's a plaque in memory of her. Whether we can get in is another matter. Well, we're in. I have to say, I wasn't entirely expecting that. Lovely little church. So, can we find Flora's memorial? There's some interesting windows. They've done away with the stained glass and actually have some lovely etched windows. Very effective. Here's the list of rectors. We might be able to see her father's name up there. Ah! And what do we have here? Here indeed is a memorial stone to Sophia Julia Sanders and Samuel Sanders, rector. And underneath is the memory of dear Flora. Many will probably already have heard of Sutton Hoo, if only because it was the subject of a Netflix film, The Dig, released in January earlier this year. It is probably one of the most dramatic and important archaeological finds in Britain of all time. The discovery was largely the result of one man, Basil Brown, a self-taught, self-trained archaeologist. Working on the mounds here at the time of the outbreak of the Second World War, in 1939, Brown discovered traces of a huge Anglo-Saxon burial ship. The ship itself had rotted away, but its footprint had been left in the sandy soil by the iron ship rivets. The helmet of the warrior that was discovered here has become for many the image which conjures up Anglo-Saxon England, and together with the remarkably decorated jewellery and armour that was found along with it, has transformed our understanding and imagination of the Anglo-Saxon world. They are no longer uncivilized barbarians, but rather sophisticated, skilled craftsmen with a trading network that stretched to the Baltic Sea and beyond. No one can clearly say with any certainty who was buried here. No skeleton or body was ever found, and initially it was thought that the burial ship might have acted as some form of bodiless cenotaph. However, in 1967, soil analyses found traces of phosphate, which suggests that the body had been once placed here, only to be dissolved away over subsequent centuries by the acidic soil. Some believe it was the burial ship of King Radwald, or maybe his son, but in reality, we shall never really know. I'll show you this absolutely idyllic spot. Now, this is the ferry that I've just taken, and I You saw the picture of me arriving by the quay on the other side. Wonderful ferryman helped me with my bike get on and off, together with another cyclist who was there. Isn't it just idyllic? And a lovely day as well. Just had a lovely chat with someone having his lunch in the cafe there, who was telling me he cycled 30 miles once and he's never got back on a bike since. That was done for him. I'm standing looking out to sea on the outskirts of modern day Felixstowe. You can see the port there in the distance. The reason I come to this spot is because this, at least somewhere near here, was where once stood another Roman fort of the Saxon Shore, in this case Walton. Like Colchester, which we visited yesterday, it too was not listed in the Notitiam Dignitatum. Perhaps because by the time the Dignitatum was compiled, the fort was already in a state of collapse and erosion by the sea. In Roman times it stood on top of a cliff overlooking the sea, probably about 100 feet high. Yet this part of the coast has been eroded over the centuries. Much of it was completely destroyed by coastal erosion in the 17th century. Fortunately, in 1722, before it crashed into the sea, a local historian provides us with a written description of the castle. He describes it as being 100 yards long and made of pebble and Roman bricks in 3 courses, with large pieces of the wall cast down on what he calls the strand by the seas. It is said that the ruins of the fort can still be seen at very low spring tides, occurring on either a full moon or a moonless night. Unfortunately, we're not going to be here to witness that tonight, because we've got to push on with our trip and get to Colchester. Yesterday we mentioned the Venerable Bede and his ecclesiastical history of England. In it he mentions a place called Donnoch, which in the 7th century was the seat, the cathedral if you like, of East Anglia's first bishop, Felix of Burgundy, later St. Felix, saint from which the town of Felixstowe maybe takes its name. Some suggest that the more original spelling of the name refers to a place where trees or meadow grass are harvested. I believe that Bede's Donnoch refers to the town of Dunwich, which is further up the coast in that direction, which has also been victim to coastal erosion. As I stand here, I would like to believe that not only a Saxon Shore fort, but also the ghost of St. Felix himself lies somewhere out there in the sea in front of us. In Colchester in Essex, which with some justification claims to be the country's oldest city and its first capital. Indeed, the Romans built a fort soon after the invasion of Claudius, and prior to the town being burnt and sacked by the rebel Queen Boudicca in 61 AD, it served pretty much as the provincial headquarters for the Romans before they transferred their quarters to London. The choice of Colchester as the first Roman capital is perhaps best explained by the fact that prior to the Roman invasion, it was the power base of the rich and powerful Trinovantes, who already had dealings with the Roman Empire in terms of trading and other cultural exchanges. Clear evidence of the Roman town still exists today, no more so than in the walls of the old Roman Colchester, which stretch for some 3,000 metres. These were built between around 65 and 80 AD, following the rebellion of Boudicca, when the original Roman town was pretty much sacked and burnt to the ground. The castle, which we can see here today, is not Roman. It's early Norman. In fact, the castle keep is the largest of its kind from that date in England. However, what we do know is that it was built over the remains of an old colossal Roman temple dedicated to Claudius, which sat here on this very site. The town is also associated with the legendary King Cole of nursery rhyme fame. This most probably results from Geoffrey of Monmouth's 12th century History of Britain. In this, he also claims that King Cole was the father of Saint Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great, who's attributed to having persuaded her son to make Christianity the imperial religion, thereby ensuring that Christianity not only became the official religion of the Roman Empire, but eventually of all Europe itself. The links between Colchester, King Cole and Helena may be 12th century fiction, but it is interesting that the small Saxon chapel in Maidenborough Street, just a stone's throw from the castle, is dedicated to St. Helena. It is believed that the chapel was founded by Offa, King of Mercia, when he visited Colchester in the 8th century, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was built on the site of an earlier chapel founded here by Helena herself in the 3rd century AD. One can dream. I'm in the Essex village of Wivenhoe, just outside Colchester. I'm just walking down to the riverside here. This used to be a fishing and boat building community, well, into the 20th century, but now is very much a suburb, if you like, of Colchester, and also, given the railway station here and the new houses, also very much a commuting place for people going to London these days. A far cry from what it would have been in the 19th century. Looking across the river at this peaceful and tranquil setting, it's quite difficult to imagine that this is the site in 1884 of the country's most devastating earthquake, at least certainly the most devastating earthquake since that struck the Straits of Dover in 1580. The earthquake struck just after 9 o'clock in the morning of April 22nd, 1884, and it's said to have lasted about 20 seconds, and is calculated to have been measured around about 4.6 on the Richter scale. Contemporary newspapers reported 3 to 5 deaths, which would make it the most destructive in terms of human life earthquake that we have probably ever seen in this country. In reality, we don't really know how many people may have died as a result of injuries suffered in the great English earthquake of 1884. What we do know, although this was its epicentre, over there on the other side of the river in what's called Roadhedge, which would have looked very different in 1884. None of those houses, all of which have been built within the last almost 5 to 10 years,
would have been there, but in the village of Rowhedge opposite, we do know that a young child was buried, attributed from having suffered injuries during the earthquake.